Thanks, Peter, and good morning, everybody. I'm calling in from Vancouver, so a little earlier here, but just about to head to my first in-person conference, if you can believe it, in over almost 2 years. So really looking forward to it and great to be here. I'm just going to share my screen if that is possible, because I've got a few slides that I think give you some sense of what we're seeing to set up our conversation today. And I think as Peter, you mentioned, what we are seeing and thinking and the research that we're collecting is really initial. I don't think we actually will know full well how both employers and employees are going to kind of react and sort of settle once we start moving back into the office more regularly. But what we do know is that, our world has been closed for almost 2 years now. And as someone who studies political and consumer behavior, I can't help but feel that, as long as a period as we've been in, our habits and our experiences and our expectations have changed. And so when I look back at this pandemic and I look back at research we did even back in April of 2020, and we asked the public, how long do you think this pandemic will go on before we get back to normal? And back then, 70% of Canadians over the age of 18 thought it would take 5 months or less, right? And so the expectations around how long this was going to last and its long-term impact, I think, has evolved as it's continued to go on. And this question of getting back into the office and what do employers want, what do workers and team members want is nuanced and I think quite unique. But what we almost all agree on is that our world is changed, and what comes after this pandemic will be very different than I think what came in. But the thesis that I have is that leaders, whether you're leading a large organization, a small team, I think have to approach every question, including whether to return back to office, how you do it, and the questions that you ask of both your leadership team and your own teammates more broadly requires a change in mindset, and one to recognize that two forces were already moving quickly before this pandemic. We had generational change in the workplace. We had technological change, which enabled more flexibility. And the generational change really pushed the demand for it. The pandemic simply accelerated that movement. And it basically freed people up to live the life more closely to their ideal. I don't think we're all going to be able to, work from a beach. This would be my dream in Hawaii or in the Caribbean for most of the year. But I think more people feel, particularly those that have been office-based in the past, that they can get closer to that ideal going forward. And so that to me is what the outlook is that I sort of bring to this conversation. And so preparing to lead your team back, how do you get back to the office, requires a few things. And the takeaways that I bring are, first, I think the era of flexibility will begin in earnest. It was percolating. I think there were demands. The research we did among millennials prior to the pandemic showed that being able to balance, not just balance work and life, but being able to integrate them together was already something that was high on demand for younger employees. But I think although older employees weren't telling us it was a priority, I think deep down they also wanted it. They just didn't expect that it could ever happen. And now we live in a world where, for those that have been able to have that flexibility and have been forced to work from home, the expectation really is cross-generational. It's not one that's only for younger. Don't assume. I'm a researcher by profession. I ask people questions for a living, and I think sometimes I forget to do that of my own team. And so I always come back to that, and then finally, think carefully about how your team works. We've done research that, among business leaders, that's showing that, we've fallen into, again, the trap of thinking that how we worked prior to the pandemic is how we're going to work going forward, and that our clients are going to want the same kind of interaction, and that's not the case. Now, I'm someone who brings a half full, kind of glass half full perspective to things. I see lots of opportunities to improve things, but there's certainly going to be some challenges. Now, what the research is telling us, both from a Canadian perspective, but we're seeing it in global studies as well, is that we are moving to this, what I call, era of flexibility in all parts of our life. How we make decisions on where we work and how we work, about where we live, about what we buy and what brands we interact with is all tied to this idea that we want to do it wherever we can, whenever we can, however we can, is sort of where I come. And when we ask Canadians who work typically in offices where they want to work when the dust settles and the pandemic is truly over, you can see there's a pretty sharp split between those who say they want to work most of their time in the office, either full-time or most of the time, and about the same number who say I want to work at home or in a flexible place most of the time or all of the time. Now, some would say, well, David, what's the age difference there, right? What's the gender difference? And there are some, but not as stark and as obvious as you might think. It's not all young people saying I want to work from home and older ones saying I want to come back to the office. And it's not all, folks with families who want to be able to have the flexibility. What we learn from our data is that no one size fits all. You can't assume that if you're younger, you have a younger teammate, that they're going to want to work from home more often. What matters more is what stage of life they're in. Do they have young kids? How far do they live away from work? How unhappy are they with the commute itself? And what kind of lifestyle are they seeking? So it's much more about personality. It's about priorities. And so that means you can't assume anything about what your young employees want. So the three lessons to sort of set up our conversation from my perspective, from the research I've done, from my own experiences as an employer, is one, you have to keep in mind first that for the last 18 months, particularly those that operate in larger cities where the commutes are longer, is that as we ask our employees to come back to the office, and I assume most businesses will have some return to the office, right? I don't think we're going to see the majority or even a close to a plurality, a large minority even, saying we're going to work 100% remotely. But what you're basically going to be doing to those team members is saying, I'm taking away, in a way, a gift that this pandemic has given you. If there's one silver lining to the horrible 18 months we've all lived through, is that for many people, they got many hours a week back, that they weren't sitting either in public transit or in a car, that they had more time with their families, they had more time to do the things that they all wanted because that commute and the preparation to get into the office was taken away. That now you have to sort of take that away from them. So explaining why is so important, right? Explaining why to your team members that you want, and just saying because I'm the boss or that's how we've always done it is not going to be enough, because we've seen that our productivity is fine over the last 18 months, generally speaking, and so you're going to have to justify it. The second lesson I've learned personally is don't assume you know what your team members want or need. I did a half-day session with my team. We're a small team. We only have 10 team members in Ottawa and Toronto, but I assumed people could work, in any environment and that they were ready to come back. And what I learned was, first, they were generally ready, but they wanted signals from me. They wanted to know that I wanted them back and that this is how it was going to happen. But two is, I learned a lot about what they think their workplace is going to be like and the inadequacy, actually, of our current space, which I'm not in right now, but you can see behind me, to serve, the kind of place that they're going to be. And that leads me to lesson 3, which is you really have to think about how your team's going to work going forward. And for me, the light bulb went off when one of my team members said to me, David, although we're going to eventually get back to more in-person meetings and more in-person team kinds of settings, most of our clients are going to continue to want us to connect virtually through Zoom or Teams or what have you. And because our teams are not going to be 100% in an office all the time, which will be the case, we're going to be connecting with our team members virtually. So we need more meeting spaces. We need places that we can hold these kinds of sessions without the interruptions of a open office setting, which, if you've been to our office in Ottawa, it's relatively small and open, and so it's not really going to work. So that forced me to say, and to really think about how much is our post-pandemic work day to day going to change and be much more like the last 18 months as opposed to the previous 4 ones. So that's my initial sort of setup the research is really generally inconclusive. There's no silver bullet, but what I've taken from it is, don't assume everybody wants the same thing, and that you can no longer just excuse, decisions because that's what you want or what you think is best. So you're going to have to find a balance between those two going forward. So Peter, I'll hand it back to you.